Hey everybody, it's Tuesday, so this must be the Taproom, and I must be Teresa. And we're here for our series at the Madison Taproom of Monaco Brewing Company. We're here for our series of Tuesday Taproom talks. And we are so lucky tonight. We have our friend Chris Walker back with us. And if you are a regular viewer, but it could happen. You might have seen Chris here before. Chris is a writer, a news writer at Truthout, which, by the way, is a nonprofit news organization dedicated to providing independent reporting and commentary on a diverse range of social justice issues. So Chris has been doing this for a while, writing on national and local topics. He's written thousands of articles analyzing the issues of the day. And what Chris and I talk about when he's ready to come in here is, what are the issues of the day and have they changed in the last 12 to 24 hours? Which, I mean, yes, they always have and they always do. But Chris indicated that he's got some thoughts to share about redistricting and gerrymandering. And so he's going to stick with that tonight and talk to you a little bit about that. So after he's done, we'll see if we have any questions in the tap room, as we always do. And then I have a couple programming notes for y'all, especially with the holidays coming up. But with that, I will give it over to Chris. And I will say again, thank you, Chris, for coming back in.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's great being here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I am Chris Walker. Like Teresa said, I am a journalist with Truthout. Yeah, we do try to write about social issues, political issues. We are a left-leaning nonprofit news organization, and we really don't try to hide that because we want to let people know as transparently as possible who we are and what we're striving for. So without further ado, I will talk to you about an issue that I have been following very closely these past few weeks, which is the what I like to call, and a lot of people have started calling, the redistricting wars. And redistricting is a hard word for me to say. So bear with me throughout this whole thing. I'll do my best. But yeah, so several states across the country, as you are all probably aware, have been doing redistricting in the middle of the decade, which is quite unusual. It's usually something that happens closer to the beginning of the decade. And I really feel like this is something that is, a lot of people who view this channel or who come to this bar are probably well aware of this, but it's something that I think that for a lot of Americans, it's flying under the radar what's happening. So I think the more attention we give to this issue, the more that we can start to understand how our government works, how it's not working, and what we can do to change it so that it works for we the people. So so what is happening right now with the two issues that I really want to focus on is how Trump is redistricting across the country and how other states are reacting to that. But then I want to give a little bit of attention to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is also going to be reviewing its maps based on two challenges, actually, to the redistricting process, alleging that there was gerrymandering. So before I start talking about redistricting and gerrymandering, I always think it's good to do definitions and talk about what these words mean, because not all redistricting is gerrymandering and not all gerrymandering is redistricting. So redistricting is the process where every 10 years after the federal census takes place, all the maps in every state are redrawn to represent the population in a better way. There's 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. They all have to be divided somehow throughout the country. Now, every state in the country, of course, gets one congressional seat. So beyond that, it's divided evenly after that. Wisconsin, for example, gets 8 congressional seats. California has something like 52 or 54 congressional seats. I can never remember that. But within the states themselves, they have to apportion the seats evenly. And it's based on population. So in the last census, Wisconsin's second congressional district, that's where Madison's located, it grew in size. But that means that geographically, the district has to get smaller. So other districts around it get larger. And we're just talking about geography. But for the most part, you got to keep those districts the same amount of people. What happens with redistricting and where it becomes gerrymandering is where state legislatures, which are charged with redrawing these maps, for the most part, they start drawing things for their political advantage. So, like in Wisconsin, the state Republicans drew the maps to be advantageous for Republicans. And you can see that in the fact that Wisconsin, which has consistently had a 50-50 statewide elections every election year, whether it's for governor or for president or for Supreme Court justice even. Whereas we have that, we have a 6-2 Republican majority consistently since at least 2011, 2012 election. And why is that? Well, it's because the maps were made that way. So that brings us to where we are now with President Donald Trump. We all know that he has a very, very egotistical mind view where he needs to be in charge. He needs to be seen as powerful. And the last thing that President Donald Trump wants to see is to become a lame duck president. And he's in very big danger of that happening because of next year's midterm elections. Traditionally speaking, it isn't always the case, but it's about 90% or higher times the case. The president's party does poorly in the midterm elections after they've won an election. So when Trump was last in office, the Republican Party lost something around 40 seats in the congressional races. When Joe Biden was in office, after he won election, the following midterms, Democrats lost somewhere, I think, between 9 to 10, maybe 15 congressional seats. So wasn't as big as a change. And that's what Donald Trump is really hoping for, is that the next midterm elections will be one of those small changes rather than a large blue wave. Now, polling data right now shows that it's heading towards that blue wave direction because of his negative approval ratings. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to cheer anytime. Absolutely. But there are ways that he's trying to rig the system. Some of those ways are going to be using the Supreme Court to gut the Voting Rights Act, most likely. But what we're here talking about tonight is the redistricting scheme that he's doing, the gerrymandering scheme. So what's happening? Well, in Texas earlier this summer, Trump called upon the state legislature there to redraw their maps in order to give Republicans 5 additional seats to their already majority that they had in the congressional delegation. So 5 extra seats. And ostensibly, they said they had to do this because of the way the Supreme Court ruled previously on the Voting Rights Act. And so the Federal Department of Justice told the state of Texas, look, you got to redraw your maps. It's a racial gerrymander. Now, out loud on Truth Social, it was very clear what the real reason was, because Trump was saying, we deserve these seats. We Republicans, we deserve these seats. We need these seats, blah, blah, blah. And it kept being said, and his supporters were saying it. Everyone knew the open secret was it's not about correcting incorrect maps. It's about winning more seats. With the midterms being the way that they are, those 5 additional seats obviously will not make up the difference if there's a blue wave. But you get Texas to do it, and then you get Missouri to do it, then you get Utah to do it, and so on, and Indiana. And in Indiana, they tried, didn't happen, but that doesn't mean it still can't happen, though. They can definitely come back to that, and it might come back later on. And all those seats start to add up. So again, if it's a blue wave, it's not going to matter in a big way. But if it's one of those small midterm elections where only 9 or 8 seats make the difference, this really could make the difference and add up. So what happened after Texas redrew its maps? We go to California, where Governor Gavin Newsom said, we're going to correct our maps in order to make up the difference that Texas and all these other Republican states are doing. Now, California, interestingly, has a nonpartisan map drawing process where the state legislature only approves maps that this nonpartisan commission draws. So they did a statewide ballot election to find out if the voters would be okay this one election to allow the state legislature to redraw the maps so that Democrats could have an advantage and make up their own 5 seats to counteract Texas's 5 additional seats. So it's basically, a lot of people have been saying it's gerrymandering for the right reasons. But, you know, we're going back and forth now. So now we got California doing it. We got Texas Republicans, California Democrats. We got Missouri Republicans. We got Virginia Democrats thinking about doing it. We got Florida, whose governor said they are definitely going to be doing it in the spring. And we keep going back and forth. It's not a sustainable system. This cannot keep going this way, because obviously what this would mean is that the voters have very little say in who decides or who ends up running Congress in 2026 and beyond. It really should be up to the voters. And there are lots of people feeling one way or the other about who's the right side on this and who's the bad side. It's all bad, because every state does gerrymander to an extent. If you go to Illinois, you can definitely see the effects of gerrymandering there that is positive for Democrats and negative for Republicans. I'm not here to say that we need to counteract the Republicans at all points in turn and things like this. I'm here to say gerrymandering, as it is a method of redistricting, is inherently wrong. So what can be done here? Well, in the meantime, not a lot. There are, of course, going to be a lot of court battles back and forth about this. The court battle in Texas already reached to the Supreme Court level. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court went along with the story that it was a correction of a racial gerrymander before, and that's the only reason that the maps were redrawn, which, again, that was kind of the excuse Republicans gave just for the partisan gerrymandering that they could do. But what can be done if the Democrats win in 2026? And what can be done if the Democrats win the presidential election in 2028? Yes. If those things happen, there's a bill that was submitted this year called the Redistricting Reform Act. And that bill would do a lot of things to change how redistricting happens in every state legislature. As it stands right now, the Constitution states that legislatures determine how maps are redrawn every 10 years after the census. Some state legislatures have decided that it's like a bill. You have to pass a bill, and even the governor has to sign on board with it. Some state legislatures have decided, no, we're just going to be in charge of redrawing, and we're not even going to allow the governor to be involved. And some state legislatures, along with their governor, years ago have signed into law the nonpartisan redistricting processes, where both parties have an equal say in who is on these panels that decide what the maps look like. If this Redistricting Reform Act is passed, that's how every state legislature across the country would have to draw their maps. They'd have to institute a panel method of redrawing. And the Constitution allows that because of the Supremacy Clause. Obviously, what's passed in a congressional law outweighs a statewide law. What else is in this act that's really good? Well, it also forbids mid-census redistricting. So these state legislatures could not redistrict their maps in the middle of a census period like they are right now for political gain. The nonpartisan panels also would not be allowed to do this under this law or bill if it was passed into law. The only way that a mid-census redistricting could happen is if it was determined that what map the panel drew was unconstitutional in some way. If a court looked at these maps and said, you did this wrong, we need it fixed, then it would go back to that panel and they would have to redraw the map, but only then would they do that. It also does some other wonderful things, like reaffirms the Voting Rights Act, especially the parts that were being stripped by the Supreme Court. It's just a wonderful law that I think, or bill that I think needs to become law. And it's one of the ways that I think that we can really look at redistricting as a fair way to draw maps instead of a, oh, will they, won't they, who's going to be the winner this year, and will they draw maps the way I like? Will they draw maps that gives my vote an equal say to my neighbor's vote down the road? Or am I going to have to live another 10 years as a disenfranchised voter? And that's really the crux of this whole argument, is what we, the voters, can do about this. And hopefully, with the midterms, I'm really hoping that this bill becomes front and center of the issue, because we will be seeing a lot of maps that changed over the past year. And I don't think a lot of voters are going to like that. We're already seeing that in Texas, actually. A lot of the electorate there is pissed off about the fact that people are redrawing their maps in a way that they don't like. In order to do that, Texas Republicans had to dilute some of those Republican districts that they already had in order to get more Republican voters into the ones they wanted. So it's possible, if the blue wave is strong enough, especially in Texas, where we've seen some Democratic gains in recent years. I mean, shoot, I think Joe Biden only lost to Trump by about 8 points in 2020 in Texas. That's monumental. And if that trend keeps going in Texas, and these Republican districts that were diluted have enough voters who are equally pissed off about it, you could see some weird things happening in Texas and in these other states where the gerrymandering has been going on. But that's, I believe, only if we keep this issue going, if we keep other issues going as well that are equally on the minds of voters, like the economy, the draconian immigration laws that go way, way too far and are chasing too many people down in illegal and disgusting ways, and so on. So, I'm going to have a little drink. That brings me to what's going on in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, the state Supreme Court, as we all know, has been in liberal bloc control for only a few years. But during that time, they took a relook at the state legislative maps a few years ago and determined these were drawn in ways that were completely illegal, benefited one party over another, but also just flouted some really basic rules, like making sure that the district maps were contiguous. I think that there was, I used to live in a state legislative district where it was basically the south side of Madison, Monona, Fitchburg, and then out of nowhere, an island of Middleton was this little dot where people in that little dot were also within my legislative district. And it was very bizarre. And there was some legal justification for Republicans doing that, but it went against the heart of state constitutional law, which says every state legislative district has to be contiguous. It has to be connected in some way. It can't just be floating islands here and there. Otherwise, it's just chaos. So when the state Supreme Court decided on that, they set into motion this idea that, well, maybe we should look at the congressional districts as well. Now, the court didn't say that, but other groups of people said these congressional maps are lopsided, they're not fair. They were redrawn in 2011 under Governor Scott Walker's watch, with the Republicans redrawing the maps and using a private firm to do that. And then suddenly, oh, wow, weird. All the data and information that we wanted for the open records, all that went missing somehow. How did that happen? So the process and how they did that was lost. And then they reaffirmed those maps, basically redrawing the same ones, a few changes here and there, but essentially the same maps after the 2020 census. Again, as I mentioned at the top of this, the congressional delegation of Wisconsin is 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats. We have Mark Buchan of Dane County. We have Gwen Moore of Milwaukee. And those are the two Democrats that are in the congressional delegation. And then you have Van Orden in the 3rd Congressional District, which you got Glenn Grothman in the middle of the state, and a whole host of other Republican characters who I do not doubt that a lot of their constituents like. But having said that, if the districts were drawn more fair, I have to believe that maybe a more moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat or even a more progressive Democrat could win in those areas. You got to remember, in the 7th Congressional District for 40 years, former Representative Ron Kind was the winner, Democrat, in northern Wisconsin, Democrat, and he won consistently year after year after year. And I don't know if he saw the writing on the wall in 2010 with the Tea Party movement that was happening then, but that's when he retired, and that's when his map was redrawn. And I brought some props for this, and this is what his map looks like now. And you can see it kind of goes zigzag up and down the state. There's no reason for that to be the way it is. If it was a fair map, you might see something more round or square. But instead, we get this zigzag piece here. And then you have the 3rd Congressional District, which is even more abhorrent. It literally is the letter Y. And that's what you have to say. Why is this the case? So you start in northwestern Wisconsin, you end in southwestern Wisconsin, then you end up in the center of the state in Portage County, where Stevens Point is. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. If this was a fair map, it would be more that rounded or square contiguous area. What is it about this county here that is different from the voters in this county, but still same to the voters in the county next to it? It makes zero sense. Again, that is the Y district, and that is the biggest reason why we are asking these questions. Now, when the state legislature, when the state Supreme Court made that ruling about the state legislative districts, they had to be redrawn, or the Supreme Court would redraw its own districts. The Republican-led state legislature panicked, and they passed their own maps that were still not perfect, but they were a little fairer. And we still have a Republican-led state legislature, but we have a few more moderates in the state legislature than we used to. We also have more Democrats in the state legislature than we used to, and it's a more competitive map. That's what's being argued before the state Supreme Court now about congressional districts in the state. We have two separate cases going before the Supreme Court. In one case, they're alleging the maps are unconstitutional because it's a partisan gerrymander where Republicans are just straight up winning without any real competition at all, where in a state like ours, competition is consistently talked about, right? Every 4 years, Wisconsin is a swing state. Wisconsin is a swing state. Well, you wouldn't know it from these congressional districts that we have. But Wisconsin is a swing state. We know that from the people we talk to every day. Our neighbors might disagree with us. At the end of the day, we can have the conversation with them. These state maps don't allow those conversations to happen. The other lawsuit is alleging that the current maps aren't just unfair for partisan reasons, but because they are unfair for keeping the incumbents in. So it's not even focusing on Republicans doing well, and it's also focusing on Democrats just doing well and having no competition at all within their districts. Kind of a fairer way to argue the same point. These maps are not being drawn in a fair way that allow voters to decide for themselves who should be their representatives in Congress. So in late November, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court ordered that two judicial panels within the state court system examine these congressional maps and that they report their findings back to them. I think that we're going to know what these findings are going to find for us. If you look at what the Princeton Gerrymander Project says, they give Wisconsin's maps a grade of F. And it's easy to see why. When you have a map that looks like this is the congressional map. I give this an F grade too. So it's possible, if these court cases go in an expedited way, that the maps could be redrawn, possibly within the next few months, offering us the potential to have a much more competitive map in the 2026 midterms. You could see competition possibly in the 7th congressional district, like I mentioned before, that was once held by a Democrat for 40 years. You're definitely going to see a lot more competition in the 3rd congressional district, that Y district. And you could see some competition also in the 4th and 2nd congressional districts, the Democratic ones, and the 1st congressional district, and possibly the 8th congressional district, which has also used to be a swing district about 10, 15 years ago. Now, again, how this is, if the courts change the maps in this instance, we're only 4 years away from another census. It's not going to fix the problem. It's going to fix the symptom. The main problem is still partisan gerrymandering exists because we allow state legislatures to redraw the maps, and not some we don't allow a panel or a nonpartisan group of people decide what the map should look like instead. So if the Redistricting Reform Act passes in Congress within the next congressional term or after the next president is elected, that would be wonderful for Wisconsin, because that would mean we would automatically have to have a redistricting panel that is nonpartisan too. And our neighbor to the west of us, Iowa, has had that in place since 1980. It's considered the benchmark standard of nonpartisan redistricting because the state legislature has never voted against what the nonpartisan map makers have ever done. And under their rules, they have to draw the maps as evenly as possible without splitting as many counties in half as possible. When you see maps like these, you see maps where counties are just divided up willy-nilly, and it doesn't make any sense. But in Iowa, they do their best to kind of make that uniform. It's much easier for them, of course. They only have 4 congressional districts, so it's an easier square situation. But in Wisconsin, there's no reason we couldn't do that either. If the state is not compelled to do so because of the Redistricting Reform Act in the future, there has to be a movement of people in our state that needs to focus on this as a priority issue. Because as much as we are being bombarded with a lot of social issues, economic issues, our farmers are struggling, our rights are being taken away from us, none of that gets solved if we can't have the people in power who can solve it on behalf of us. So yes, we need to work at both the federal level and the state level to make sure something is passed, and it should be happening at the same time right now. Now, a lot of people might be watching this and say, hey, Chris, you're a left-leaning guy. Of course you want redistricting reform. That's going to help you. That's going to benefit you. But I'm here to tell you, everyone wants this. If you ask the question straight up in polling, you find that it is very, very well-liked idea by everyone from every political stripe. A recent NBC News poll found that 82% of Americans overall like the idea of nonpartisan congressional maps. Think about that, 82%, 8 in 10 Americans. Is there any issue where there's as much agreement in America right now than 82% supporting nonpartisan commissions for redistricting? And that's not even partisan. 9 in 10 Democrats want that, but 76% of Republican-leaning voters also supported that idea. And I will be frank right now, and I'm going to end on this conclusion. redistricting reform will not happen with this current president in office, and it will not happen with this current Congress in power. It will happen possibly with Democrats in power, because the Redistricting Reform Act is sponsored by Democrats. But if we could show those Republican lawmakers the power of voting and the power of making maps competitive everywhere, and that includes in states that are red and blue, then it's possible that maybe in the next 2 years, maybe in the next 4 years, we can pass something like this that is one of the most agreed upon pieces of legislation we've seen in the past 40 years. Think about that too. That would be monumental, to see everyone get on board with this political idea and agree with it. What better way to reset our country after Donald Trump than that? Thank you. And that's where I'm going to end it tonight. So thank you so much. Yeah, definitely. Questions for sure.
Hi, it's just me, Teresa. You mentioned that there were 2 lawsuits before
Yes.
the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which I hadn't realized that there were 2.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about it in terms of who brought those lawsuits and sort of why? I mean, the why at the end of the day is kind of obvious, but
I can't remember the groups that brought it forward, to be honest. And part of that is because I wrote it down in notes that I didn't bring here tonight. I think that is one of them.
come on up here if you
And
want.
I
You want to
think that-
ask a question or talk to him?
And I don't know for sure what the other one, but my gut says it's Law Forward is the other one.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, or?
So I guess like my main question is like, what's your main, like, how do you think like that the redistricting reform would pass? Do you think that it's more likely that we see like an independent commission at the state level? Do you think we're more likely to see, like the federal government step in, sort of like Congress like act? What do you think is gonna sort of?
What my prediction is on whether it's going to be, if it happens someday, is it going to be the state level doing it independently, or is it going to be a federal mandate?
What do you think is the most likely?
I'm a bit of a cynic on this. I think that it's going to be more likely that the federal government will have to pass a law before Wisconsin Republicans pass it on their own in the state legislature.
Yeah.
I think that if Democrats can keep hold of the governor's office, that math changes.
Yeah, I
And
think
we can make it more of a priority within the governor's office if Democrats hold on to that, and even say to Republicans, maybe that governor won't work with them until we pass this priority. Make sure that is something that we can make sure happens in the future.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think that now that we have fair state legislative maps, I'm kind of more like optimistic that we'll be able to take, the state Senate, the state assembly, and, maybe even maintain the governor's office. And I think if we do that, there's a good chance we're able to pass like sort of a commission, which would be good. I mean, of course, you still have Republicans saying, "Oh, it's rigged. Democrats are gerrymandering."
Absolutely.
It's always just the bad faith arguments. And I think, it's still going to be tough, because even if Republicans, like if they get a trifecta, what's to say they aren't just going to ignore it like they did in Utah, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's where I agree with you 100%, is that it's a lot more possible than it was 10 years ago, when state maps were basically 2/3 Republican lawmakers and 1/3 Democrats, even though we had a 50-50 state. We now have probably 55% Republicans in the state assembly right now, just as an example. That makes it a lot more easier. You can get maybe a few of them, even a few Republicans, to get on board with this, especially if the next governor is a Democrat.
Yeah.
And then we can say we're doing it in the spirit of fairness. We're returning to our roots as a state of being more fair, more open, more able to sit down and have that drink with someone that you disagree with, and move forward there. But again, unless that happens right now, I really do feel like the best, or not the best, but the most likely way it's going to happen is through federal legislation. But I'd like my mind to be changed on that for sure.
Yeah. No, I hope that, we can get a trifecta here, and we can maybe try and pass some reform, because I think that's what we need. but I think obviously the federal government would be better just in the long run, because then you wouldn't have Texas
Yes.
redistricting in the middle of the decade. You wouldn't have, well, I guess California just responded, so I wouldn't even
Exactly.
call that unfair.
And that's kind of the idea too, is that if it happens in one state, it has to happen in every state for it to work really, because California switched back temporarily
yes,
for that reason.
Mhm.
What's to say that Democrats in Wisconsin wouldn't switch back temporarily to correct another problem in another state somewhere
Yeah.
down the line? So I think making it into a federal legislation is the better choice.
agreed.
Which one is more likely to happen? I still think the federal legislation, but
Mhm.
if it comes down to just the state or nothing, I'd be happy with the state doing
Yeah,
it
no,
by
for
itself.
sure. I just because I think if we can continue to have fair state legislative maps, I think that's ultimately the most important thing. Because it's been a huge problem, for Governor Evers. He's been basically screwed for the past 2 terms.
Sure.
He can't do anything, right?
The most he can do is executive orders
Yeah.
of powers he's already been empowered by with the state
Yeah.
legislature.
And those were for the powers that they didn't strip away from him at
Exactly.
the end of the Walker administration. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's just I think that managing to hold on to our fair legislative maps is obviously the most important thing. And I just I hope we can find a way to do that, whether it's through a commission or whether it's through passing a lease change map or whatever it might be. But I just hope that can happen. It was nice talking to you.
It's nice talking to you. Your name again?
My name's Luke.
I'm sorry?
Luke.
Oh, nice to meet you, Luke. Thanks for
Nice
coming.
to meet you. All right.
Thank you, Luke. I understand that Luke is old enough to vote now. Is that right?
Yeah, first ever vote for Kamala Harris. My first ever vote was for Kamala Harris. Well, actually, I voted
Congratulations.
in the school board election before that, but and then I voted for Susan Crawford. It was the first ever Supreme Court, and I will be voting for Chris Taylor. So
Yes, our friend.
I'll
Chris
tell you, my
Taylor,
first
she's our
vote-
friend, yeah.
My first vote was for Russ Feingold, so that kind of tells you how long ago
I'm not
that
going to
was.
tell you guys who my first vote was for. It's not coming out of my mouth. Does anybody else in the tap room have questions? You guys, anybody have any questions for Chris? And I'm looking forward to maybe you Luke, you can talk to Chris a little bit afterward, because Chris writes for a publication called Truthout, and you could start to follow him if you're interested.
Absolutely.
That's so
Thank you.
great. I'm so glad you guys came in, and we'll let you back at your shirts here in just a moment. So, all right, then I will. Oh, thank you, Mike. Mike's taking good care of us here tonight with his.
Oh,
with
we
his
got one more
equipment. Oh,
question.
is somebody coming? Scott? You're gonna have to talk in here, else we have to.
This is just a conversation in the tap room. So you talked about Texas before, and so what is an idea that you might have? Because Texas, literally, even in presidential elections, votes under 50%
Mhm.
of actual. And so this concept of well, Texas is red and it always will be red doesn't make any damn sense, because we can historically look back over the last 40 years and see that they don't even show up at better than 55%, even for presidential elections. And we're talking 13 to 18% in statewide elections.
Yeah.
So how do we change that mentality? It's not even about changing the laws in Texas. They're going to keep doing the bullshit where they decide to
So your question is,
get rid of the number of actual polling locations, drop-offs, you name it. But the voter turnout itself is Texas's problem.
yes. So the question is, how do we get voter turnout higher in those places where we need more protections for voting in the first place? And the answer to that is make the state more competitive. It's kind of obvious, but not so obvious. And you have to think that this federal legislation to force an independent redistricting commission in there will make the state more competitive. Because right now, Texas is right on that edge of becoming a purple state. It's still way more red than blue, but it's right on the edge. It really, a lot of Democratic voters are moving there from places like California and other parts of the country. And they're bringing their values with them. They're bringing their Democratic Party values with them. And that's not, I'm not saying that like a bad thing, but just, but like, to bring voter participation rate higher, you have to make the state feel like that they can win and that they can, and it's a very double-edged sword. How do you do that? Do you do that by winning elections, or do you do that by empowering people to take back their state somehow and feel competitive? Or and it can be very unmotivating when they see year after year after year the state legislature there is worse than Wisconsin's, where they're turning into a purple state. They still see deep red in the state legislature, and then they just keep taking away their voting rights, their voting access to the ballots. Like you said, they took away polling locations, things like that. But what it has to be is that the people themselves have to start seeing this for what it is. And part of that is people like in the media like me starting to talk about it more, and people who are your neighbors talking to them about it more, and just making it a topic of conversation. One of the things I and that comes to a different point that I keep seeing is that when I go to have a drink with my friends and they're like, oh, I wish we just wouldn't talk about politics. And I'm like, no, that's how we got here. That's how we got to this situation. Because 20 years ago, we weren't talking about politics, and we just kind of let it slip by. And then we had the Iraq War happen, and then we kept letting it slip by. And then we had the bankers rob everyone, and then we kept letting it slip by, and that's how we got Donald Trump. So part of it is making those districts more competitive, and part of it is also having those hard conversations so that people want to make it competitive and know that they can make it competitive. I guess that's my long way of saying that. So
Can you get on the mic, because we
Absolutely.
record these too, so people can hear it. That you don't have to be on camera.
Yeah, but no, I'm just asking, what do you mean by competitive?
Right.
'Cause it's ambiguous.
And that's the $64,000 question, right? How do you do that? And I think you do that by getting good candidates. And I don't mean centrist candidates. I mean good candidates who will fight for us and actually mean it. I think you also have to do that by creating good movements. And I don't mean centrist movements. I mean good movements that are going to have those tough conversations in our communities about what we need to change and how we intend to change it. Now, it would be great if I had a magic lamp right now and I could rub that and make that happen. That takes years, if not decades, to build. But it has to start somewhere, and I don't have the answer, is the short of it. But we do have the answer if we are willing to make that happen, if we're willing to take a few hours out of our week and join these organizations that we really do feel proud to be a part of, put our feet on the ground when we need to go door to door in support of a candidate we feel love for and we want them to be in office. Do those kinds of things and recognize when they happen, and don't think about elections strategically as much as we do, and start thinking about them as ways to create these movements.
I think going off of like Scott's
Mhm.
point is there's a lot of disillusion because you vote, you create an essence of movement, but there's no action.
Yes.
It's just there's a flip flop and there's a party line. So
And
create a space that is meaningful. Sorry, what was the term that you're saying?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
Competitiveness, yes. Yeah.
make it competitive.
Mhm.
I think that bottom line is through action. How do you make competitive action through grassroots movements, through actually making change in the ground,
Mhm.
so people believe in the change versus saying.
And I think I just had this
Very
thought.
ideological.
Yeah, I had this thought right now is we need to stop making elections the goal. Elections are the goal,
Numbers,
but
it's
yeah.
little numbers. You're talking about numbers.
We have to look beyond election day and say, how are we now going to hold these people to account? And how are we also going to build our community? And how are we also going to create new ideas that these people we just elected might not be on board for, but they'll listen to it and they'll have to listen to it. And it starts with the ground up politics. And unfortunately, we've had so many decades of people trying to dismantle those ground up politics. We used to have civic leagues and things people would go to and hold meetings in their living rooms, and we don't really have that anymore.
No, I think one of the beautiful things that you said was the aspect that people nowadays, and for decades, have not been talking about how you don't want to talk about politics.
Mhm.
Politics is day-to-day life. That is what we live on.
Everything is politics. Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
The service to ourselves by saying, hey, we don't want to talk about
Excellent.
politics. Yeah.
Thank you for your good points. Thank you.
You want me back up there? So anybody else have questions? Otherwise, hi, Mike. Just a couple program notes. Happy holidays to everybody. I'm filling in as Santa's 10th reindeer tonight, I guess. So happy holidays, whatever you may celebrate. Wanted to let you know that we won't have Tap Talks for the next 2 weeks, but we have lots of stuff going on down here, and we have some different hours during the holidays. So if you look at our website, oh, Scott, it just went out of my head. mbcmadison.com.
Oh, our website, yeah, NBC.
mbcmadison.com. Okay. Yeah. So, but look at it, because we do have different hours, even some hours on Christmas Eve and Christmas, if you're so inclined, and some other special events. Next Tuesday, there's music here, for example. And when we come back in January, our next date will be January 6th. And we're going to, sort of have our slate of folks as we've started to have this at the end of this year. So we'll have some authors, and we'll have some community groups, and we'll have some politicians. And we will also have our friend Chris Walker here once a month. Got that, you guys? Chris will
Thank
be
you.
here once a month, doing, I think, a variety of things with us and for us. And so we're pretty excited about having him join our cast of characters. So thanks to Scott for bartending, and thanks to Mike for taking care of all the technical, audio, visual, engineering needs. Engineering, I won't forget. And thank you so much to Chris, and thanks you guys in the tap room too for jumping in. And Luke, it's so great to meet the future. I'm excited that you came in.
Thank you.